Okay.
And her work life remained very stressful, and she recalls visiting her son in intensive care unit and needing to step out of the room on multiple occasions to take calls about work at Branderville from Cherry Lai. 4 months after being born and still in intensive care, Oslin unfortunately died.
I remember my son passed away on September 28th, 2023. At that time, I also had like quite important meeting with a client at 7 a.m. and he passed away like 11 p.m. before the meeting. And I think my mind was very get into the working. The first person I touched that time was my working groups, not my parents, but my working groups, because the next day I will have like quite important presentation. I told them, can you guys back up me, cover me for the presentation, because I need to attend my son's funeral. I need to taking care of that.
Sheetha then took a few days of emergency leave from work, although it turned out she didn't go through the exact correct process in order to do this. A process.
Who cares? So I've been meaning to watch this video for a while, and it's something by People Make Games. It's called 100 Slaps, the breaking news the games industry ignored in 2024. And I'm going to assume it's like
the story
an expose on like maybe workers being exploited. I mean, that's common, it seems like, even in the Western gaming industry.
We're about to hear should have already ricocheted across the games industry this year and cemented itself as one of the very worst scandals in its history.
Scandals,
and I think that's exactly what would have happened had the people involved lived and worked in California or in Paris or in Tokyo rather than in Jakarta.
Indonesia.
Instead, outside of Southeast Asia, it's like nothing has even happened. Today we're going to try and do our best to remedy that, but first I need to provide you with this significant list of content warnings and just say to you that the stories you're going to hear today are at times really unpleasant.
Alright, so this video contains references to physical assault, self-harm, psychological abuse, body shaming, and the premature birth and death of a child. Okay, there's a few short clips of video depicting some of the physical abuse and self-harm.
But the reason we're sharing them is because the people involved want as many of you to see and hear what they went through as possible. In early September, I was sent video footage of an Indonesian game artist called Krista Sydney slapping herself across the face 100 times. With her permission, I'm going to play a very short section of that video here, and I obviously need to warn you that it's distressing to watch.
What? Oh. Okay.
Now, the reason I was sent that footage was because back in 2021, I'd actually spoken to Krista Sydney about her job and her relationship with her employers for a story I was working on about outsourced labor in the video games industry. She told me back then that everything was going really great, which was surprising to me because it didn't exactly line up with what I'd heard from many of her co-workers who felt exhausted and overworked. But what I didn't know until now is that Krista had been suffering in a way I could not have even imagined at the time. Because that video you just watched a very short clip from, Krista claims to have recorded that and then sent it to her boss as a punishment for not having performed well enough at work.
What?
And as extreme as that video is, it's really just the razor-sharp tip of a much larger iceberg in which Krista and some of her colleagues were subjected to years of abuse at the hands of an employer who was able to control and manipulate almost every aspect of their lives.
For the whole week, like, I wasn't allowed to sleep.
For me at the time, it was like scary, lonely.
She wanted me to take a picture of like the blood in my mouth.
She was like, don't look at her. You have to be strong. Don't show your empathy towards her. It was really scary.
The wooden...
What disturbs me about all this is like I understood, you know, the whole outsourcing thing, especially in the tech, and not just the games industry, but the tech industry was terrible conditions. Like extremely low wages compared to, like, let's say if you were working in Canada or the United States or even like France. Absolutely terrible. I've heard working conditions in terms of like the workplace environment's terrible. I've also been in Southeast Asia for quite a long time, and usually a lot of the abuse that I saw was in like non-tech related things. So to like learn and like see this for like tech industry or gaming industry is kind of jarring to me, because it's like these are people whose work is done on outsourced like portions of projects that are outsourced to them because cheaper labor, and it's like one a form of escape that so many people use. Gaming is not a form of escape at all for these people, which is terrible if you think about it.
Up the door, like I had to like
it's a nightmare.
My head like as hard as possible.
What?
I had like concussion like symptoms.
But before we can begin to understand all of that, let me very quickly get you up to speed with that first story I reported that had led me to speaking to Krista 4 years ago. So, back in 2021, People Make Games published a video titled How Game Publishers Buy Crunch Overseas.
Right.
We'd wanted to investigate a part of game development that typically gets very, very little attention from the media. And so we told the story of two game studios which most of our audience had never heard of before, despite their contributions to games like The Last of Us, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Gears of War 4, and Warcraft 3 Reforged. And that's because these two companies, Lemon Sky Studios based in Malaysia and Branderville Studios based in Indonesia, are what people in the business of making games call external developers, or maybe outsourcers. This means they get hired by clients like Naughty Dog or the Coalition or whoever it may be to create, in this case, art assets that will be then used for their games. It costs an awful lot less
Modern
to hire
slavery.
a game artist in Kuala Lumpur than it does in, say, Vancouver. And as a result, outsourcing to lower income countries has played a huge role.
The number one cost in any company, especially gaming, right?
As our
the people
uncovered, the potential for exploitation here is significant. We found that employees at each of these companies were routinely expected to work long stretches of unpaid overtime at the expense of their health. We're talking weeks straight, sometimes months, of artists sleeping in the office, working weekends, and late into the night in order to meet deadlines which simply could not be met otherwise. Here's my closing line from that video back in 2021. And at some point, if that keeps on happening, then crunch culture is no longer an unfortunate side effect of the business. It is in fact the product that's being purchased. So yeah, we published our investigation and well, not much changed really. Publicly at least, I think the most consequential thing I saw happen in its aftermath was a panel at an event called the External Developers Summit, which had been put together in direct response to our reporting. It was called Let's Talk About Crunch. And in fact, one of the bosses of the two studios, Ken Lai of Branderville, was actually invited to take part, which was great. Although, do you know who wasn't invited? Literally anybody who could speak to the actual experiences of the actual workers doing the actual crunch that we'd just uncovered. All they really seem able to do is ask someone like Ken Lai, is there much crunch happening at your company? And he's like, no, there's not.
I don't agree that developers sell the crunch to Southeast Asia.
What?
Instead, the developer is the key to bring the great value to these two countries.
And nobody challenges.
Just based on the currency conversion, if you are, at all aware of foreign exchange, that's just absolutely not true what that guy just said.
On this, despite
it's
our
crazy you
reporting
said that.
Shone the spotlight on employees who said they spent months working at that office until 3 a.m. in the morning, or one put it quite bluntly that, and I quote, "You are not treated as human." For the next 3 years, both Lemon Sky and Branderville Studios continued on, and the games industry continued to rely on their services in order to ship its games, without, as far as I can tell, any meaningful push to improve the working conditions of the artists doing that work. This was until just a few months ago when news broke that Branderville had shut down, and that moment would prove to be the catalyst
Top Comment's worst company ever.
Rush forward and share the true horror of what had been going on behind.
That does not look like an
doors.
office.
And at the very center of these allegations was Krista Sidney and her story.
So I joined the company in February 2019. I applied as a concept artist but didn't pass the portfolio at the time.
Krista was instead offered a marketing position, which she accepted, but things got off to a rocky start after she'd raised her voice to the company's CEO, Ken Lai, during a disagreement over how some business cards had been printed. And given she was still on probation at the time, she presumed this incident would now see her let go from the company. But it wasn't actually Ken Lai who would make that decision. It was his wife, Cherry Lai, who ran the day-to-day operations at Brundeville, and ultimately, that decision would be up to her.
Just as she was about to announce that I was going to be kicked out, she said that God talked to her. And so like she said she's going to take me under her wing.
That's
And
like,
give me like 2 weeks to prove myself.
Krista describes this new relationship between herself and Cherry as
that's
something
emotional
resembling
manipulation
mentorship,
101.
at least to begin with, anyway.
If anything, because I was like in such a vulnerable position,
Right.
I was like very grateful that
Socially and financially.
I received a second chance.
But she said this dynamic began to shift in early 2020 as Jakarta entered lockdown during the COVID pandemic, and as Krista and several of her co-workers moved into the studio itself to live there full time. It's worth quickly understanding just a little about the building where all of this is happening. Brundeville Studios was based here in central Jakarta, with most staff working either on the first or the second floor of these offices. Then on the ground floor, you've got a lobby and reception area, as you might expect, but also a set of dorm rooms, which house a select few employees who've been invited to not just work here, but live here as well. And they're not the only ones, because 3 floors above them is a bedroom belonging to Ken and Cherry Lai. Several of the employees who lived here during that period have told me that Cherry Lai developed a strict schedule for the way in which they were meant to use their time each day.
5:30 a.m. we need to wake up and then like pray to God, and then like 6 a.m. we need to like go do our exercise, and then 8 a.m. shower, 9 a.m. be at the office, and then even like what time we need to drink water. Like she also like put it like in the schedule.
It's crazy,
and
dude.
then what time we we eat, what time we go to bed. So that kind of thing.
That schedule also included a weekly prayer meeting, which employees told me was considered mandatory. It was also a Christian prayer meeting because Cherry Lai is Christian. But their employees weren't, not necessarily. In fact, the vast majority of Indonesians identify as Muslim, and these particular employees practiced a range of different religions at the time, but the mandatory prayer meeting they needed to attend was always Christian. Cherry's relationship with certain staff members during this period also became increasingly personal.
Slowly, Cherry started to divide us.
When Krista first moved to the studio, she shared her dorm room with another employee called Elenda, and the two of them had actually been close ever since their college days together. This was until, according to Krista and other employees I've spoken to, Cherry took an active interest in their relationship.
She started to gossip about Elenda to me, started to try to get me to be suspicious of her. She told me that, you and I were the same, we're
classic manipulation,
girls,
dude.
and Elenda is more of a nerdy girl. But before that, we never had any problem with each other.
Several former employees told me that they believe Cherry intentionally meddled in the personal relationships of her staff, and that this was especially true for women.
She has this Excel sheet, the list of the people she considers her friends in her life, and number 1 was me. So it made me felt special at the time.
These one-on-one conversations, however, would then feel extremely at odds with the way in which Cherry would criticize and discipline Krista and other employees during the workday.
Let's say if I make a mistake and then she will scold me publicly. Sometimes
this is read by an Indonesian voice actor to protect the source's anonymity, right?
Really feels angry or whatever, she would just call names. Maybe stupid, you piece of shit, you bitch. Yeah, all those kind of words. And then privately, she will say something like, I spoke to you publicly so people don't attack you, but actually you are fine.
So much emotional manipulation.
When the former employees came forward with their stories in early September, they came with receipts. Some of these have been shared publicly online already on social media, while others have been sent to People Make Games as part of our own investigation. And as a result of that, I've now read through hundreds of messages which employees say Cherry sent to them either privately or in group chats with other staff members, and these messages show her regularly threatening to fire her employees for the smallest perceived mistakes.
Honestly, good on
using
this channel
language that is
to
just
like
totally
ensure
demeaning
people's
and
safety
inappropriate.
first and foremost,
These messages
despite,
paint a picture of
revealing
an
this damning
easily
info.
irritated and usually erratic leader who expects and often receives complete subservience from her employees, who she in turn then micromanages to an
Please don't.
extreme.
What the fuck? Wait, what? What's the reason this time? Pregnant and sick? Please don't let me look at my own gender.
Who she
You would think like a woman would be like, I don't know,
to an extreme,
appreciative,
despite Krista often receiving the
or
very
like
worst
understanding
of this
but
attention,
of like
she
other
and
women,
employees
but
were at the same
apparently not.
time ostracized by the rest of the company.
I wonder if their religion had
because they
anything
were
to do with
seen
it.
as being utterly
It's like
devoted
super workplace
to Cherry.
discrimination.
All of us know that Krista is struggling. One of my friends mentioned that Krista cried several times after being scolded like this, but she still became Cherry's loyalist. She and some of the others had been brainwashed by Cherry.
They did not like me at all. If they do something wrong, I probably tell it directly to Cherry. I didn't
What a great name he has,
really
by the way.
much friends at a time because like most of people hate me.
This isolation was also extended to their families as well.
Yeah, so she's.
This is
always
sounding more and more like a
taking
cult with
this,
the
like, other
isolation
people actually
practices.
like family and friends, like they're just like your burden. Like if you want to succeed, like you have to
Cut them off
basically like
and
set
ignore them.
aside.
For me at the time,
Don't
it
have
was,
any
like,
work,
scary.
personal
Lonely.
balance.
I didn't have someone to talk to. I didn't feel like I don't have any friends. I cannot trust anyone.
Right.
Even like probably
Definitely not at the
my
workplace.
I mentioned earlier that as part of our reporting on crunch conditions at Brandeville, I'd first contacted Krista back in 2021, where she told me, and I quote, "I know some people say this place is tough to work at, and I agree, it's a very disciplined company, which is why I think it's great, because as an artist, we tend to let bad habits like slacking off get the better of us. I love the fact that they accepted us no matter where we're from and who we are, so I'm happy to say it's also a very woman-friendly environment." Krista has since told me that in fact, this whole email exchange that we had been dictated to her by Cherry Lai.
What?
But perhaps the most surprising revelation for me anyway was that in the aftermath of our video having been published, Krista actually recorded her own video in defense of Brandeville Studios, which was then shared with organizations like the External Developer Summit, who she told me was threatening to blacklist Brandeville from the event going forwards because of what our reporting had uncovered. And in this video, Krista is visibly overcome with emotion about how much Brandeville means to her and how thankful she is to both Ken and Cherry Lai.
Even my family, they know how life-changing it has been for me to work here. They saw me, like, my mom has seen me change. It really touches me when I saw like how much my mom supports me working here. It's something that is very special for me.
This video was later shown to other employees at Brandeville, some of whom remember feeling extremely uncomfortable as they watched it.
Yeah, that
even at that
doesn't
time
seem
where
right.
where Cherry showed us that video, Krista is really proud and was tearing up too, because she was like, "Yeah, I'm doing that gladly, Mrs. Cherry," something like that. And then we're like, "Okay, girl, you need help, but you don't know."
We asked a representative from XDS if they remember receiving this video, and here's a response I got from its executive director. "I do remember seeing that video, but I don't believe it was sent to XDS directly. I think a colleague shared it with me at the time. And yes, I think you're right that we didn't know what was truly happening at Brandonville, which may have been the reason we gave Ken Lai a platform to address the issues of crunch. I'm sorry to hear the situation has worsened, and I do think it's a good thing that you're shedding light in order to mitigate this from happening at other studios." The situation has worsened is one way to put it. I think it's worth reminding ourselves here that this was an outsourcing company for the video games industry, because I think as we need to delve into some of the more coercive and violent behavior happening behind closed doors, it might be easy to lose sight of that. But to be clear, Brandeville Studios, since we last reported on its crunch in 2021,
this is Age of Empires.
has contributed
Age of
games
Empires.
like Age of Empires 4, as well as a now cancelled sci-fi project from Deviation Games before it shut down earlier this year, and even Ubisoft's upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows.
No way.
Krista recalls a turning point being the next External Developer Summit that took place that year in Canada, and that she would be attending in person along with Ken Cherry, and several colleagues.
Yeah, and she
Good on
told me
them.
to,
I think it's fucked up that they essentially
like keep being awake.
I mean, maybe it's
I
just
wasn't
true
allowed
for
to
the
sleep.
gaming industry in
So,
general, but
for
like
the whole week, like
your
I
passion
wasn't allowed to sleep. I had
was
to
taken
like
advantage
work
of
with her. She was like
to the point
really
like they break you as a
micromanaging
human being.
everything. I had to like work while I had like a Google Meet on, and then like shared my screen so she can like monitor if I'm like asleep or not.
Krista told me that Cherry seemed to require very little sleep herself, and sometimes she would expect the same from her employees, but this was on a whole different level. She also clarified that when she's talking about a week there, she actually means a 4-day stretch building up to the flight over to Canada, and I asked her during those 4 days how much in total she thinks she slept.
Probably like a couple of minutes. I took like some like 5-minute breaks to the toilet. I think like the first time I finally slept was on the plane.
And at the
2
event
minutes of
itself,
sleep.
there was a problem.
So we took a group picture like at XDS to like send to Cherry because like she like her legs were like so swollen from not sleeping that she couldn't attend the event. It just so happened that I was standing in the middle of the picture, and then Kenlai was standing like in the corner, and she got like really mad. She told me that, oh, like you stood in the middle of the picture when like it's supposed to be like the CEO, like basically
That's an actual thing in
danger to Kenlai
some cultures
as the CEO.
when you take pictures.
So I got like in a really big trouble because of that.
Like where
she told me to
certain people
write,
are,
like,
but
some sentences like 100 times and then like submit to her as proof.
Here is Krista reading those same sentences back today.
I am Krista Sidney. I am very sorry because I am not humble and I am lying.
what?
I gave excuses. I suck.
Oh my god. Take pictures of the sheets. So she was what do they used to do when like you misbehaved as a kid? You like write on the chalkboard and shit, right? Like this is basically the equivalent of that. What is this? 61, I am Krista Sidney, I'm very sorry because I'm not humble and I'm lying. Then 62 is I am Krista Sidney, I'm very sorry because I'm not humble and feel lying. It's the same thing over and over? Are they with some variation? No, it's the same thing over and over. Oh my god.
Because I used lazy as my excuse today. The truth is I am greedy, selfish, and I think dirty and nasty.
Krista has also shared WhatsApp messages with People Make Games from this trip, which appear to show Cherry dictating who Krista is allowed to talk to, including whether she's allowed to speak to someone delivering takeout or
may I have permission to talk to the restaurant staff? Dude.
To 7-Eleven. Other messages see Cherry writing a long, rambling screed about how Krista needs to accept God into her life, comments about Krista's parents and their marital problems, and finally, a demand that Krista should fear her and fear God in order to succeed. In the following days, Krista claims to have tried to resign from Brandeville Studios, although she says that Cherry would not allow this to happen.
What?
I had a phone call with her like late at night. I told her that I wanted to resign because like I really couldn't handle it anymore. I felt like I was being a burden because like everything I did led to her like being angry. So it really felt useless. Felt like I'm being a burden to.
I'm assuming this is the point where
like,
she cut back on her aggression.
That I'm not allowed to resign.
Never mind.
Because I had a lot of debt.
Debt.
According to Krista, Cherry had explained that this debt
doubled
had been
down.
accrued over the course of her time at Brandeville, during moments in which Cherry had brought her along to expensive meals, purchased her gifts, or invited her to staycations during the pandemic.
And also like the hours that she spent like talking to us, even though it's basically like nonsense, but like she said like it's basically like educating us. So she said that she's invested like all of this like for years at that point, like 3 years going on.
We need better laws to
like,
protect freedom of speech in this digital age. Sure, but we also need better laws to make sure even people who are being given outsourced work for gaming studios or whatever are also afforded protections from like being exploited by trillion-dollar companies that could easily afford to pay for the same level of quality and for the same amount of work higher wages to either the outsourced or people who are already in the companies, right? I'm sure there's like thousands of stories where people already in the companies are seeing work outsourced. It's not their fault or anything. It's just very simple economics, very simple financials at play. If you could get cheaper labor somewhere else that can like, help finish these massive projects to make even more money. Of course, you're going to do that as a company, but to the extent that which people are being abused, emotionally manipulated, taken advantage of, it's modern slavery. And this sounds to me like it's a modern slave cult, with how they isolated people from their families and then forced them to not even let them resign. It's this is stuff you hear, or at least you heard back then, about like physical related labor in a lot of Southeast Asia, or even in Africa, right, or even in the Middle East. But the fact that this is now like more and more becoming prominent in the tech industry and the gaming industry, I think that's just crazy.
So I wasn't allowed to resign.
After returning from this trip, the abuse
not allowed to resign
reached a totally new extreme.
Imagine like this is Cherry and here is Krista. She told Krista like, "Oh, you ugly fat pig, step back." So she have to move back and hide herself because Cherry doesn't want to see Krista. And then after that, she was like, move again. So she started like, okay, and then keep. And
so
then,
a punching bag.
Even though she was treated that way, Krista still has to put smile on her face.
Cherry said that if she asked Krista to eat a dead rat, Krista will do it. And I was like, I'm sorry, a dead rat?
She kept like commenting on my weight specifically, like in front of like everyone. Like she would say like, oh, Krista is like ugly and fat. If like she keeps like being like ugly and fat, like she would get fired.
During a period in which Krista and two other members of the marketing team were working from the front desks of Brandeville Studios and another building elsewhere in the city, Krista's appearance was being heavily micromanaged by Cherry. In the next clip, you're going to hear Krista use the term QC, as in quality control, which is something you might usually expect to hear when describing feedback on, for example, marketing assets that you're working on, and not the clothes you're wearing on your body.
We need to every morning take a picture like of our like, full body, like neck down. It show like
you need to go back home and change. What the hell's going on, dude?
Like our outfit that day, and then she would like QC it. She would tell us like if we look like fat,
need
or
to be
like
slim.
Our clothing is like professional.
Too cute. Don't wear open toe shoes. What? I hate your shoes. I don't like your pants, and your size is big. I don't accept. What the fuck? And the reply is like, hi, Mrs. Cherry, noted, thank you. Hi, Mrs. Cherry, understood, thank you. Dude, this is crazy.
Or not. And then like she would comment like, my body like needs like more diet, that kind of thing.
It was also in this later period that Cherry's punishments for Krista became more and more physical. While Krista has told me that much of this happened privately, some did also take place in public. For example, one meeting in early 2023 saw Krista being humiliated as some kind of lesson for the few other Brandeville employees in attendance.
She told Krista to kneel down, her arms straight up. She will like told us like, don't look at her. You have to be strong. Don't show your empathy towards her. Something like that. It was really scary. How can I not feel sorry if I see someone treated that way?
She doesn't know the word kneel.
Why
so
didn't they just
time, like,
punch her,
like, bow down,
dude?
And then, like,
or
I would,
something.
Like, bow, but then like she get like angry because
no
I
one
didn't understand like what she was saying. And then I had to like kneel. She told like a couple of
if I saw this, I'd be like
inside the room and like see me like kneeling for hours.
In private, things were getting much worse. Krista said that to begin with, Cherry would ask her
this is
to
insane.
slap her own face lightly like this, in order
okay,
to wake herself up if she looked lethargic or if she'd made a small mistake. But soon, this would no longer be enough, and she would ask her to do it harder and harder.
The earliest record that I have was like a recording of me hitting myself like in the mouth until like I bled, and then she wanted me to take a picture of like the blood in my mouth.
The most extreme version of this, you've already seen some of. It's the video in which Krista hits herself as hard as she can across her face
100 times.
100 times.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen that full video, I've counted each slap as it lands, and the thing that has stuck with me the most, other than the sheer violence of it, is the expression on Krista's face throughout. It's the same Krista that I've spoken to, but also it's not. It's like she's on autopilot, like she's not really even there. Krista claims that in most cases she was asked to slap herself in private or over a video call, but in this case, because it was a recording that she then needed to send to Cherry, we actually have a screenshot of the chat log when that footage was sent. It reads, "Hi Mrs. Cherry, noted, will do. I would like to report that I have slapped myself 100 times and on my way to Brandeville Studios. Thank you." Cherry replies, "I don't believe. How to prove?" 3 minutes later, Krista sends the video to Cherry, who then replies, "Did I ask you, send me? You can't directly without asked. Impolite." Impolite, that's the word she chooses to use in this moment, having just, presumably, watched her employee do that to herself. I can't get over the coldness of that, the slightly disinterested, irritated callousness of it. Impolite. I asked Krista how many other people at Brandeville Studios at the time knew that this was happening to her.
So throughout like 2023, I believe like no one else like knew, because like it happened like either I was already like in my
this is in Indonesia,
and then like she called me
one
and
of the
she told me to like slap myself, or it happens like when I'm
companies that did outsourcing work for a lot of the games.
Krista told
Quite
me
a
that she
few
believes
notable games
Cherry's
actually.
partner and the CEO of the company was also unaware of this physical side of the abuse. She said when it came to the rest that he saw some of it happen and seemed to feel uncomfortable about it, but most of the time these things would happen when he just wasn't in the room. There's
Sounds like his wife
video, this time recorded by Cherry Lai herself, in which she's berating a visibly confused,
just took over,
dazed-looking Krista outside a room on the 3rd floor of Brandeville Studios. I'm gonna play a bit of that video for you now. We're gonna include some subtitles that we've written, and then Krista is going to explain in her own words what she claims has just happened to her.
Okay.
I'm very sorry.
You lie, she told to me for a while. You lie, then you need to tell the truth. What is the truth? What's the truth?
She told me to hit my head against the wall.
Bro.
So it was like the wooden frame of the door. Like I had to like hit my head like as hard as possible. I thought like she was like joking, right? But no, like she wanted me to like hit as hard as possible until like
she seems dazed.
I had like
seems like she's concussed.
Like symptoms. And in that video, like when she was berating me, I was already like delirious because of like the impact. And then I had like my vision became like all white for like a couple of seconds. And then like my ears rang, and then I had like a migraine. And basically like I was like really like out of it. And then she tried to like gaslight me into thinking that I was like a liar because I didn't like remember, because like, well, I just hit my head.
We also need to take a moment to talk about financial abuse here, because there are at least 2 examples of which we've been told about. We're going to start with one of Krista's co-workers first, Caesar. He told us that each month he sent a large portion of his salary to Cherry Lai in order for her to help him control his spending habits.
Like he knows like I like to buy stuff and my money management wasn't good. So I was like, okay, like I trust her.
Caesar told me that he was left with just enough to cover his essential needs each month, but if he then wanted to make an additional purchase, something that was considered a luxury, he would then need to ask Cherry's permission as to whether or not he could do that, and it was up to her to decide whether or not that purchase should be made. I asked
reminds me of an abusive parent. Yeah, no, this is absolutely abuse.
Compared to
and no, it's not very Christian-like behavior.
From that moment, like I didn't.
It sounds like 1800s, 1920s pre-union industrial work in the U.S.
According to Caesar, he doesn't actually know.
I think it's just like one of the many forms of modern slavery.
in total
it's just
as part of this arrangement.
Not perhaps as grotesque as other forms today because of the nature of the industry. It's software, it's tech, it's gaming.
And when he left Brandeville a few years later, I asked him
it's not like you're
to those funds.
going for blood diamonds or anything, right?
Me back, so like
and that's part of the reason why stuff like this doesn't come out as often
Caesar told me that
outside of certain circles.
Cherry somewhere in the region of 5 million Indonesian rupiah as part of this arrangement. That works out at just over a month's full pay. On top of this, when it's
but I wouldn't be surprised if some people's reaction on seeing this kind of stuff is like, oh, you're just being dramatic. Oh, why don't you just leave, bro? Or you know what I mean? Like it's just. I think that's a big part of the reason why abuse like this is just not, even when covered, probably not cared about, right? And also, as long as people are getting their games and stuff like that, and their entertainment or their own escape, if you think about it, you don't really look into it, right? You don't look through the credits of a game. No, I don't know anyone who does, and try to see which studio worked on what, where that studio is, what's the working conditions of that studio. No, I mean it's like. I think it will come to a breaking point sometime in the future, especially as, the effects of globalization continues to take place in a lot of industries, especially the gaming industry, where people will start noticing this more. And I think it will require quite a lot of backlash beyond what we're seeing here. I don't know about the reactions to this video yet. This video has got almost 250,000 views from 5 days ago. It's like nowhere near 1 million views yet. Again, it's going to take a while, I think, even with this kind of stuff coming out about outsourced work. I mean, we don't even know fully to the extent of what it's like for people who aren't outsourced workers, right? Because there's still plenty of stories, at least from former game devs, including some of my friends who were former game devs, about like the kind of treatment they got as workers, as people working not outsourced. So it's going to take a while.
Resigned from the company in 2021, he claims that Cherry told him, in fact, he owed the company over 200 million Indonesian rupiah, several multiples of his total annual salary. As you can see in this invoice that he provided us with, part of this is due to a Unity certification test that he'd taken, and then this gigantic chunk at the top here is for a training program he claims to have not even started yet, which would have seen him become an instructor at the yet-to-be-built Brandeville Academy, a school for new artists in Indonesia headed up by Ken Lai. Caesar was eventually fired from Brandeville Studios a few months later, but not before he claims to have paid back 7 million Indonesian rupiah, leaving just 20% of his paycheck intact each month. Krista's personal finances were also tangled up with Cherry's own as well. In the final months of Brandeville Studios, before it would declare bankruptcy, Krista was, on paper at least, being paid a decent salary.
Basically, she told the finance that my salary was 18.5 million.
Just for reference, how much 7 million Indonesian rupiah is? That's $429 US, which may not seem like a lot, but the buying power of $430 US in a lot of the world is huge. Like that could be someone's 2 years of wages for somebody in Malaysia. It's just kind of crazy you have to pay that back for no reason. Or sorry, not pay that back. Basically got extorted, that amount.
But then she told me that
which game is it? So this is a studio that was given outsourced work by companies like Ubisoft, Naughty Dog game, or whatever.
So
they were involved in quite a few known games.
The right state of mind to think that is anything suspicious, because she didn't give me space to think, because first of all, severe sleep deprivation. Second of all, she sent me a message almost every hour, so I had to I didn't have time to think of anything else rather than respond or work.
Krista has shared WhatsApp messages with Peanut Games dating from April to June of 2024, in which she can be seen informing Cherry on multiple occasions how much she's received that month from her salary, and then Cherry appears to dictate what she then needs to do with it.
So each month I was only supposed to keep like 1.5 million, and then like the rest, like 17 million, I need to withdraw, exchange to Hong Kong dollars, and then like pass it to her. Or I have to buy her like stuff, like a lot of like expensive clothes and like expensive items.
So yeah, this company was primarily for like animation and stuff like that, which obviously you need for games, right? Some of the games mentioned in this video so far is like Age of Empires 4, which we played, and the upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows, which is like, you know, huge. That's Ubisoft, right? And there's other games and companies that were briefly mentioned or probably not known about. We'll probably look some stuff up here, but Ubisoft already made a press release statement saying that they were horrified, or rather, they called the alleged mental and physical abuse at an external support studio called, you know, Brandoville, which they called it deeply disturbing. While the abuse didn't transpire at Ubisoft itself, the support studio did work on Assassin's Creed Shadows. So yeah.
Doesn't sound great, does it?
It's real.
Sounds a bit fraudy, actually. But hey, if you're wondering what Cherry makes of these allegations, what her response to that might be, as well as everything else in this video, we have actually had a small amount of communication with her, and it was weird, and I'm going to tell you about that later on in this video. But needless to say, she did not respond to this specific allegation. Now, there's one more story I want to tell you about before we get to how all of this came to an end. It's from a woman that you've not heard from yet. Her name is Shifiana Afiati, or Shifa for short, and she was for a time the business development manager at Brandeville Studios. While working at Brandeville in late 2022, Shifa became pregnant with her second child. And this pregnancy, she told me, was really difficult to manage alongside her work life, which was extremely taxing.
Right.
Also,
so when you're pregnant,
specifically,
you have an entire human being inside of you.
Of Cherry Lai.
He didn't care if we're pregnant. If she asked us to go for a meeting with her after working hours, we need to attend. And again, when I was pregnant, sometimes I had a meeting with her until 1 a.m. in the morning.
What are you going to talk about until 1 a.m. in the morning or 3 a.m.? What the? What?
Quite intense.
In early 2023, while in her second trimester, Shitha began to hemorrhage. She was rushed to hospital.
Probably
stress. She was informed by the medical team there that she needed to stay at the hospital and get as much bed rest as possible.
That's
at
stress,
the same time,
dude.
Shiva tells me there was an issue involving a project that she'd been managing at work, and while in hospital, she was contacted by Brandeville employees, first asking her to come into the office for a meeting, and then later asking if she could work remotely from her hospital bed, answering emails and responding to clients. She declined both options and eventually even asked to resign from the company altogether in order to just focus on her own health and the health of her unborn child.
Right.
At the time, Cherry Lai was the one who contacting me. He said that he was really mad because I'm resigning. And she even blamed at my husband. Is it your husband again? You abandon your future, your dream job because of your husband again?
This is not a dream job.
He said, okay, just take a leave, but you cannot resign.
2 weeks later, Shifa gave birth to her second child, a little boy called Oslan. He was born more than 2 months prematurely and was immediately transferred to a neonatal intensive care unit. Over the coming weeks, Shifa would visit Oslan there each morning, with the hospital being relatively close to the Brandeville offices.
Sometimes if I have time after I visit my son, I come to Brandeville to chit-chat with Brandeville colleagues, just to have someone to talk with. And Cherry Lai noticed about that I already chit-chat with my friend, and she asked me if I can start to work. You know, in Indonesia, the maternity leave is 3 months. It was only 1 month after I gave birth.
Shitha agreed to do this, although on 2 conditions, the first of which was that she could visit her son still in hospital, and the second was that her workload would need to be much more manageable given the intense pressure she was now under. Shitha claims this did not end up being the case, and her work life remained very stressful, and she recalls visiting her son in intensive care unit and needing to step out of the room on multiple occasions to take calls about work at Brandeville from Cherry Lai. 4 months after being born and still in intensive care, Oslan unfortunately died.
I remember My son passed away on September 28th, 2023. At that time, I also had like quite important meeting with a client at 7 a.m. and he passed away like 11 p.m. before the meeting. And I think my mind was very get into the working. The first person I touched that time was my working groups, not my parents, but my working groups, because the next day I will have like quite important presentation. I told them, can you guys back up me, cover me for the presentation, because I need to attend my son's funeral. I need to taking care of that.
Sheetha then took a few days of emergency leave from work, although it turned out she didn't go through the exact correct process in order to do this, a process that should have involved her asking Cherry Lai directly for permission. People Make Games has been provided with a screenshot of a message that Cherry Lai then sent to Brandeville's HR manager at the time, a woman called Alicia Sandra. And in this message, you can see her discussing what is happening with Sheetha and what needs to be done next. I want to remind you here before I start reading it that this message was sent just 3 days after Ozlan had passed away. Of course, I understand her loved one passed away, but basic communication can't be avoided, and no way of any happened can have any exceptional to we need to do anyone a favour. Sorry, it's written like this, you can sort of guess what she means. So just mark down in our record.
No way we pay for her currently sad mood, right?
And starting now, counted her as in leave. No way we pay for her currently sad mood or anything. This is so funny. I also have my dad passed away, or any kind of thing happened won't make things not function. This is really not normal to me. Anyways, I am just saying, to me, she's like a Natalia. That's referencing another employee at Brandeville who has children. And is that every woman will become one? So scary. Sheetha had at that time taken 3 days off of work in order to grieve the death of her son and would return to work full-time the following week. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. Sheetha, a few months later, resigned and would move with her family to Australia. Yeah. On August 8th, 2024, Brandeville Studios entered liquidation and was shut down. While most of its former employees waited for their severance to arrive and looked for work and opportunities elsewhere, a handful were convinced by Ken and Cherry to help them try and set up a new outsourcing company called Lai Lai Studios. Krista is keen for me to point out here that she didn't design the logo, which for some reason resembles a toilet. The group spent a few weeks holed up at the St. Regis Hotel in Jakarta, where they would try to figure out how to pivot to this new company and how also to attract investment. These would be the last weeks that Krista would spend with Cherry Lai, and they would also be some of the most violent. Krista recalls one moment in which she and another woman, Alicia, the former HR manager you just heard about, the two of them were approaching the hotel room of Cherry Lai.
So she opened her hotel room. I stood in front of it. She she hit my head until my glasses fell off. She stomped on my glasses until it broke. And then she slapped me a couple of times. She pushed me against the wall, and then she poured water on me. And then told me to clean up the mess.
This incident has been corroborated to People Make Games by Alicia Sandra, and she also confirms what Krista believes to be the reason for this attack, which is that the two of them had left supplies for Ken and Cherry next to their hotel room door rather than hung on the door handle of the room itself. 2 days prior to this, Krista, Cherry, and several other colleagues attended a meeting at the KYK building in Jakarta, where
there's no way the husband didn't know.
And after realizing that a document hadn't been printed off, which Cherry had requested, Cherry slapped Krista several times, punched her in the chest, grabbed her around the throat, and then kicked her before leaving for the meeting that was happening upstairs. The following month, with Brandeville Studios now having officially closed for good and those few people still orbiting Ken and Cherry having now drifted away Even more so, Krista tells me that it was once again at the St. Regis Hotel, this time she's waiting for Cherry late at night, that she finally realizes this woman's power over her is no longer real.
So St. Regis is like a really cold.
Right, the company's
inside
gone.
The hotel is like so cold, it felt like it was winter over there. And I had been like standing by like since morning until like nighttime. So it was like, I was so cold. She didn't let me eat until like it was like late at night, and she didn't let me to like properly cover myself up with like a blanket. So she was taunting me. She was like challenging me basically. I thought to myself like, Shorty doesn't have like anyone else. Like I was like quite literally like the only person left with her, and she's still doing this to me.
Krista claims that Cherry had sent her out with her ATM cards in order to check the account balances ahead of the next day, and upon her arrival back at the hotel where she was expecting to meet Cherry, she found that Cherry had in fact returned to her hotel room. Now Krista knew the drill at this point. She would usually be expected to either
I would take those ATM cards and draw everything out, dude.
call her, maybe knock on her hotel room door. She would not be able to leave without Cherry's permission.
But this time around, like I was like, you know what, I'm so tired, it's like 2 a.m. I should order like a cab home. And then when she realized that I wasn't going back to her, she panicked.
She tells me there were messages, phone calls, and threats, but she didn't go back. Instead, with the help of her mum and her brother, Krista began the work of compiling evidence to show what had happened to her and her colleagues over the last few years. Because here's the thing about bombarding someone with abuse over the course of years, and in Krista's own words, almost every hour, when this time comes, those messages exist. And Krista and her colleagues are going to have just so many receipts to work with. Indonesians have a phrase that's popular right now as trust in the country's police force and justice system are especially low. It's just 4 short words, and here they are.
No viral, no justice.
Right.
It means that if you want the authorities to take your story seriously and act upon it, if you want justice, you need
for a lot of
that story
places
to blow up on social media and force them to get involved. And in Indonesia, at least, that's exactly what happened with the Brandeville allegations. They went viral. And in turn,
this video they made goes viral, bro. Like super viral.
The Jakarta Globe is looking to bring Cherry Lai in for questioning, although that is going to prove difficult for them because I believe Cherry Lai is no longer in Indonesia. I think she's in Hong Kong. And the reason I think that is because, well, she told me. I emailed Cherry in November about the allegations you've now heard in this video, offering her
It's super easy to move around in Asia, so that was like my first thought.
To ask them. She replied and started off by thanking me for the reporting I'd done on the crunch conditions at her studio in 2021, which was unexpected, before going on to say, and I quote, "To me, my part of the story is not important, as long as my team are good and safe now. However, I will love to meet a new friend if you can make it to Hong Kong." I told Cherry that I'd be happy to travel to Hong Kong in order to speak to her, but that any conversation we had would need to be both on the record and on camera.
Right.
And at this point, she seemingly changed her mind and shortly stopped replying to my emails. As for Ken Lai, well, he never replied to begin with or answered my calls, and he remains a mystery to me, honestly, here. I'm not exactly sure how we're meant to feel about his role in all of this.
Nah, he knew.
The employees I've spoken to are somewhat split on his culpability. Some make the very persuasive argument that he is as one.
Listen, like, if my wife, like, okay, if all this shit is coming about my wife, you know what I mean? I'm just like, if you didn't know, I feel like there would be some sort of like, I don't know, divorce or some shit. I don't know, that's crazy, dude. I think he knew, like, the whole time, 100%.
Cherry Lai's biggest enabler. As a husband and as the CEO of Brandeville Studios, he should have known what was going on. He should have done more to stop it. He should have protected the people that he was responsible for. That incident at the KYK building I mentioned just a few minutes ago, in which
they were in the same building.
That Cherry slapped Krista several times, put a hand around her throat, hit her in the chest, and kicked her. Well, one of the witnesses who saw that happen told me that this took place in the building's lobby, and when it happened, Ken Lai was in that same lobby, elsewhere in the room, but in the same lobby, and appeared to act as if nothing had happened. But what confuses things for me is that there are others, including Krista, who believe that Ken Lai may be another victim of Cherry's abuse, and that his silence comes from a place of fear.
Maybe.
I don't know if that's true. I just don't really know enough about Ken Lai altogether. And when I mentioned that to a former Brandeville employee a few days ago on a call, they replied, nobody does. As for Krista's future, I asked her what she intends to do next, now that all of this has finally gone public.
Personally, I'm hoping to recover mentally and physically. So I'm under like some treatments at the moment, and then hopefully like I can get back on my feet if things go well. Planning to study law, like want to be able to help like other artists like in the future, like for them to have like a better working environment than I did.
Krista told me that Indonesia is in desperate need of improved labor laws which can better protect its workforce from exploitation across pretty much every level.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, it's a very common theme
going forward,
in a lot of Southeast Asia.
It's a remarkable place for her to have ended up after all that she's been through.
Really, in a lot of places in the world.
Now, I do want to end this video by also just talking about the reason Krista and some of her co-workers agreed to be interviewed by me again this time around, because I really think that is the elephant in the room when it comes to this story. Now, this concept of no viral, no justice is certainly part of it, but there's something else going on as well. The video games industry, as we know it today, would look completely, utterly different without outsourced labor.
Right.
Seriously, if you pick almost any AAA
this is what we were talking about earlier, like with the credits, right? Like how often do people actually look through the credits and look at the studios and where they are and what kind of workplace environment they have? Not a lot,
collection,
if any.
Properly read through its credits, you're going to start to get some idea of the sheer scale at which this medium has relied on outsourcing for things like the creation of art assets, animation, audio work, localization.
Even for shows nowadays, I feel like the outsourcing is crazy. Back when I were watching Secret Level, it's on Amazon Prime. It's like a video game anthology, and like, let's say there's like a 9-minute episode, like for Mega Man or whatever, and it'd be like 5 minutes of Mega Man and 4 minutes of credits. And then just look at the credits, it's like so many studios and so many different global locations. It's insane. So yes, absolutely, the gaming industry is probably the same at this point, just because the quality level plus the production level of a game, especially a AAA game or a AA game even, is probably gonna rival or surpass the level of a movie or a show. So absolutely.
That's assuming the game you've picked has properly credited all of the people involved in its creation, which is not exactly a given, but you get my point.
Right.
However, these Brandeville employees want you, our audience, to hear about their story because outside of their home country, they're not being treated as this crucial linchpin of the video game making process. If they had been, you probably would have heard about these terrible things that have happened to them already. And the reason you haven't is because outsourcing, particularly when it comes to lower income countries, is a topic that people living in the global north don't feel very comfortable talking about. And that discomfort has led to, in my opinion, one of the very worst abuses of power I've ever come across in this industry, being largely missed or perhaps even ignored by people who don't live in Indonesia.
I don't know if it's comfort. I think it's just people don't care to know in the first place. Again, like who's gonna pick up Call of Duty and then, you know what I mean? Like it's just like, it's a form of escape for so many people to the point you probably don't want to think about what went into the game, if that makes sense. So I think it's not discomfort. I think it's just not caring in the first place, which obviously needs to change because, you know, if you want things like this to change or improve, you need to have some sort of public backlash to it, just like it was for blood diamonds, just like it was for certain chemicals being used, just like it was for certain, you know, ingredients in the agro-industrial, you know, sector. So it's like, we'll see what happens, right?
Barely being covered in the press. It's not being called out by the game studios who've relied on Brandeville's work up until now. and it has started no wider conversation outside of Southeast Asia about the working conditions of outsourced labour in the video games industry.
They had their hand in a lot of things.
Why is that, do you think? What makes Krista Sidney and her co-workers any less important than game developers based elsewhere in the world? There's likely many answers to that question, but none of them are good. If this video does end up reaching a wider audience and brings these stories to people living in the UK, in Europe, in the US, the global north, I hope it does prompt some conversation, some proper conversation on that front, at least. I'd like to offer a huge heartfelt thank you to everyone who spoke to People Like Games for this piece. I think it requires a very special kind of courage to take these kinds of experiences public and be this vulnerable about something so awful, and I hope you feel that we did those experiences justice. If you're watching this video and feel that this kind of games journalism is important to you and that we're offering something you're not getting enough of elsewhere, then please do consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/peoplemakegames. There's just no way we could have taken a swing at an investigation like this without the direct backing of our audience. We've been working on this one since September, and it's required just so much time in terms of tracking down the right people to interview, sorting through a mountain of screenshots and evidence, and corroborating the stories that you've now heard in order to be able to publish them today. To be pretty blunt with you here, we make very, very little money from YouTube advertisements, certainly not enough to run a channel like this. We've not sold a portion of this video to a sponsor. It would not have felt right in this context, I don't think.
That would have been, that would have been really weird. I kind of want to read some of the comments here, right? Like, Indonesian perspective here, workers' rights are a formality and workplace abuse is so common because complaining about your job will never be taken seriously. The mentality is suck it up because that's life, which only goes so far when your autonomy as a human being is being tested. Before anyone says other countries are like this too, doesn't mean that this practice should be normalized, right? It's actually insane. It's hard to quit when you're psychologically coerced to do whatever your superiors say. Jakarta is also the kind of town where someone from your previous job is highly likely to know someone from your next job. Your reputation will likely take a hit if your toxic superiors start talking shit about you to people in the industry. That's why this story has to go viral before it could be taken seriously. Let's see. As an Indonesian game dev who mainly works on outsourcing projects, thank you so much for returning to the story. I'm shocked to learn this wasn't picked up everywhere else. No, it absolutely was not. I think a lot of people, at least in the global north or west, are a bit more concerned with like quality of games, right? Or with like perceived issues with games, like, you know, the whole DEI thing, or like woke, you know, some games are too woke, right? You know what I mean? I think people are more concerned with quality of the products that they are getting, rather than kind of thinking about, well, what's the quality of, you know, a human being's workplace behind this product I'm looking at. So that's just kind of consumerism in a nutshell, though, right? Because it was all that everyone in the Southeast Asia video game sphere pretty much talked about when the news broke, not just because of how horrific it was, but also because of how it was a stark reminder of just how vulnerable and prone to exploitation our own careers as game devs were, and the lack of workers' protections afforded to people working in the creative industry here. To me, hearing the story felt like a bad omen of something that could happen again to anyone down along the line as the games industry here grows. The only question being when, not if, right? Yeah, Brent, as an Indonesian, I thank you for exposing this. Sadly, Brendoville case is one of many labor violations as neglected in our countries. Yeah, that's so that's, I mean, honestly, I think the hardest part for me in this video was the woman whose like kid died from being born prematurely, like 2 months before, and then she was like forced to work during that time and then never got time with her kid, which and who also ended up dying. Like, that's just, I think that's like kind of beyond abuse. I think that's like lawsuit level easily. I think we deal with an obviously less extreme of this in the United States, where our own toxic working standards were conditioned to make excuses for this kind of thing. Yeah, that's what I was kind of talking about, right? Like, I think some people's reactions to this will be like, it's not a big deal, or you could have done something, or why didn't you do anything, or you're just being dramatic, right? Because, you know, while the conditions in this video presented are, of course, terrible, There's, of course, like, I feel like similar stories of emotional manipulation or your boss being a piece of shit, even in, the richest country in the world, right? It's just, I think that's going to be, unfortunately, some people's reactions.